Hello again. Welcome, Ashley, to the Fireside Chat. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Um, I want to talk to everybody a little bit about MEMPC and the Fireside Chats. If this is your first time joining an MEMPC event, MEMPC is Master of Engineering Management Programs Consortium, and we are a group of Master of Engineering Management programs at some of the leading universities in the US. And the goal for the consortium is to raise awareness about the Master of Engineering Management degree. And the Fireside Chat session is a way for us to showcase the strength and diversity of our alumni, and in the process, the strength of the MEM degree. So let's get started. Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Rutu. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you as well. So today we're talking to Ashley. Ashley is an MIT SDM, which is System Design and Management Program alumna, which is MIT's Master of Engineering and Management Program. And she is the Senior Manager of Systems Engineering, Sports Medicine at Smith & Nephew. Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself? I find that the speakers do a great job of introducing themselves versus me trying to read off of a resume or something.
Yeah, happy to do that. So I'm Ashley Brady. As Rutu mentioned, I manage the systems engineering group at Smith & Nephew right now. So Smith & Nephew is a medical device manufacturing company. We work in a lot of different types of devices. We do orthopedics, total joint replacements like implantables for those types of procedures, robotics to enable total joint replacement, joint repair, wound management, and sports medicine is the particular division that I work in. So that's really all kinds of injuries you could imagine that happen from sports, skiing, all of those kind of things, rotator cuff repair, ACL repairs. So our group is really looking at arthroscopic surgery, so minimally invasive surgery, going into those joint spaces with small cameras and repairing injuries and making sure to kind of get you back to your full state of life. So that's where I am now. But to give you a little bit of background on maybe how I made it there or kind of the path that I took. So my undergraduate degree was in mechanical engineering, and I've spent the duration of my career in medical device development. So I started out at a couple big medical device companies. I worked at Johnson & Johnson on surgical devices and Baxter Healthcare on infusion pumps. That kind of got me hooked. I really loved not just the complexity of the devices that I was working on early in my career, but also like the clinical complexity and understanding how the things I was working on interacted with the human body and patients and kind of the surgical workflows as well. And then from there, I transitioned into product development for kind of a large portion of my career. So still working in medical device space, but with, again, medical device companies, pharma companies, startups. So getting to see kind of a wider range of different types of companies and different types of devices across the medical device industry, and really getting to do some deep kind of technical design work, which is what I was looking for at that point in my career. So spent quite a bit of time in product development consulting and found my way back to get my master's degree at MIT during that time as well. So yeah, and then from there, I found my way to Smith & Nephew a few years ago. I've been here for about over 4 years now, so time flies.
It sure does.
Yep.
Now, actually, SDM is a little bit unusual in the sense it's a mid-career professional degree. So students who join SDM come in with at least 5 years of work experience and so on. And I'm always curious and interested in knowing what motivated them to think about getting a graduate degree and what were the rationale for coming to MEM at that point.
Yeah. So for me personally, I always knew I wanted to pursue a master's degree. And during my undergrad, I did a co-op. So I was kind of working while I was still finishing my degree. And that experience really made me want to go and get more work experience before I went back and got my master's, and be able to tailor what that master's degree was for kind of how my career was progressing. So so that was, in general, I knew I wanted to do something like that. And then when I kind of got to a point mid-career, the catalyst for why I kind of looked at it at the time was I'm somebody that's really motivated by learning, and I was in a company I loved. I had been there for a few years, but I kind of felt like my growth had plateaued a little bit as I got comfortable and used to the things that I was doing. And so it felt like a good time to kind of go and pursue that master's degree. And I live in Boston still. I was living at Boston at the time. So for me, I knew I was going to keep working full time. So I was looking at programs that had some of that flexibility that were either local or fully remote, but a little bit hesitant to do fully remote. So the MIT SDM program was a great fit from that perspective. And it was also just really aligned to my interests. The time I was doing some program management on programs and some kind of more technical work, systems engineering, and the tenets of the SDM program or system architecture, systems engineering, and program management. So it kind of fit into the things that I was doing, and I thought would give me skills regardless of which way I chose to go, and also might help me make a decision on kind of where I wanted to steer my career longer term.
That's awesome. And then, so you did MIT SCM, and then how did you go from medical devices to sports medicine and systems engineering? Was that always something you discovered while you were doing SDM? Was it always the plan?
So for me, when I went to SDM, I really went to level up my skills. So at the time when I went back to school, I didn't have any specific ambition to make a career pivot, and a lot of the folks in the cohort did, which wasn't surprising. But I think a lot of people use it as a jumping off point to make a change in their career. But for me, I was I liked medical devices. I liked what I was doing. I had a unique opportunity in the second year of the program to TA for SDM. So that allowed me to leave my job and go back to academia full time for a year, which was really great. It's a year that I still I'm really grateful to have it, and had a ton of great experiences, and got to dive into the curriculum a little bit more. But because of that, it also kind of put me in a position where I kind of was thinking, well, maybe I should do something different. I've got to go and find out what my next thing is. Um, but ultimately for me at that time, I loved product development consulting. I wasn't quite ready to say goodbye to it yet. So I did find my way back to product development consulting. Um, but then a few years ago, so I graduated from the program in 2017, and in 2019, somebody reached out to me who was actually a contact from SDM. So it was someone that had guest lectured for the program, and let me know, hey, Smith and Nephew, they're setting up a systems engineering group. It's brand new. There's nobody in the group yet. They're looking for people with kind of formal systems backgrounds to help build out the capability and define what it's going to be. So it was this really unique opportunity that I couldn't turn down, and was really well aligned with my interests and skill sets. But for me in general, I think it was a little bit of a takeaway that you don't like the network that you build as part of the program, the skills that you pick up, they're applicable after graduation as well. So I found with the program, I was immediately more effective, even going back to the kind of roles that I was doing before the program. But I was performing differently in those roles. And then I think my story, it's a clear indication that somebody that I met kind of offhand in the program really helped me find my next position. And it was really the experience and the skill sets that I got from SDM that made me, a candidate that they thought to reach out to, which was great.
I can imagine. How is it transitioning from product development consulting to systems engineering, and then maybe into a little bit more of a leadership role, since the systems engineering group was just starting? So I can imagine it must have been um, the opportunity to kind of to form the way it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so it was really exciting. And when I when I was in my product development role before, I had some opportunities to work with clients who were kind of rolling out medical device development for the first time. So maybe it was a pharma company trying to do a device, or consumer products companies trying to get into medical device development, which kind of had that flavor because a lot of product development is good systems engineering, requirements and architecture and figuring out those foundations. And I really enjoy that part. I'm a big believer in frameworks. SDM gives you a lot of frameworks in terms of how to tackle hard design problems and development problems. So I think the skills that I built as a product development consultant really helped me kind of come into Smith and Nephew and work with the team that they were building out in systems to understand, like, what are the specific challenges here? Where are you trying to grow? Um, where are we trying to improve? And to help kind of introduce some of the basics, and figure out how we instill that into our procedures and our culture and all of that to help kind of make some shifts. So I found kind of the combination of the training that I got in SDM and the I'll call them consulting skills that you get in consulting to kind of help figure out how do you drive that change, how do you like really identify problems and tailor your solutions to those problems were really helpful skills to make the transition.
Yeah, it sounds like a perfect fit, right? Like everything you've done leading up to it kind of prepared you for that role. And how was it for you leading projects and taking that leadership role for the first
Mhm.
time? I mean, I'm not saying, I mean, I know consulting is also a lot of leadership and so on and so forth, but being in charge of a project is, I feel like has a different flavor to it. How was it? How was the transition
Yeah.
for you and how was the experience for you?
Yeah, so I really enjoyed it. Like one thing that I struggled with in consulting is you never have full control over your programs, right? It's always somebody else's program and you're helping it, you're invested in it, but you're never the one truly in the driver's seat. And so it was really exciting for me to kind of get to take on that role on one of our exciting programs at Smith and Nephew. And so for me, like the things that I love about that is I love kind of getting a nebulous problem. And the program that I was working on really was kind of blank sheet design. It's something brand new for the space. And so again, bringing those frameworks to the team, helping them figure out what are the true customer needs, what are the true stakeholder needs, how do we figure out what concepts are going to help address these, getting feedback from external folks. All of that is stuff that I really enjoy. So yeah, and I think another element, maybe in terms of talking about the transition, going into a bigger company in that technical leadership role, another thing that I gained was an appreciation for kind of the scope. Like the scope's bigger at a big company, right? It's not just about the product development piece. You've got to understand the business case, and we've got to know what the regulatory strategy is to get this through the FDA and approved. And so, really, I've really enjoyed working with that cross-functional team and getting kind of that broader view of all the pieces that go into it and how do we keep them all moving and aligned and functioning so that we can get the product over the finish line and actually into the hands of surgeons and patients. So that piece has been really exciting and challenging, but challenging I think in a fun way for people that like to deal with complex program or projects.
Yeah, and I guess SDM is probably the perfect program to teach you the tools and methodologies to address, right, complex systems and multiple
Mhm.
stakeholders and how to keep them aligned, if you will. For full disclosure, I'm an SDM alum as well, so I know the program Ashley went through, so we have a lot in common in that sense. Um, and it is a great program. Um, so it sounds like almost like systems engineering, that what you were doing is kind of like product management, but from a different lens and with a different title, if
Mm.
you will, right? In a larger organization as part of the systems engineering thing, instead of a product manager owning a small piece of the product and pushing the feature through, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, I always describe like when people ask me if they're coming in interested in systems engineering now at Smith and Nephew, I always say that the way that our team's structured is we kind of wear three hats. So we are systems engineers. We own the systems engineering deliverables, which are requirements, system architecture, like those big pieces. But we also really serve as the technical lead on the program. So we're heavily involved with the cross-functional team. We're directly working with kind of the stakeholders, internal stakeholders across the board. And then the third I say is kind of in some places in med device it's called like clinical engineering, but it's really understanding the patients, the surgeons, the clinical workflows. So yeah, so in many ways, systems engineering is used as kind of a broader term for a lot of things that the folks in the group do.
that's pretty awesome. And what would you say, as you said, for somebody who's interested in systems engineering, what would you say are some of the most important skill sets that are required to succeed in a role like yours,
Mhm.
in a company like Smith and Nephew, for example?
Yeah. So one thing I found, at least when I stepped in and was kind of getting to know the team initially and trying to step into this role as technical leader on one of the teams and systems engineers, was it was really important for me initially to highlight my technical acumen. So even though we're all engineers, we've got technical degrees, at least the team that I was working with, they wanted to know I could talk the talk. I kind of had to show that I had the street cred to, like, yep, I've done development. I know some of these things. And not saying you have to be an expert on every piece of the puzzle. That's why we have development teams and people with different skill sets. But being able to ask them good questions, getting into the lab to understand how our systems worked was important. And then the other pieces that I think are really important is kind of understanding of the product development process. On really big programs, especially, and things that have a lot of tentacles, a lot of sub projects, a lot of sub teams, it's more than any person can hold in their head. And to me, again, as a systems engineer, I think of that's one of the reasons we have systems engineering, so we can break things down into more manageable subsystems. We can keep teams running in parallel. And so as part of that, you really got to trust the process, because you can't be in the details on every piece. And I think having those basics, product development frameworks, other frameworks that you might use to drive development, that's really important to have an understanding there and make sure that the team's using those to drive efficiently. And then the other big things are just communication. In these roles, you're often finding yourself needing to get deep into the weeds with the engineering team, and you also need to be reporting up to senior leadership. So being able to communicate at those different levels effectively is really important. And then the last one I might mention is just consensus building. I kind of mentioned the collaboration with the cross-functional team in these types of roles, and it's important. There's a lot of stakeholders, and by definition, the cross-functional team, the people on that team are going to have different points of views, right? It's the reason we've got them. But it is important to understand how to kind of take those natural tensions that exist and get the team to work together towards a common solution. So those are some of the big ones that come to mind for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the consensus building is probably the most work and the most important piece of it, just to make sure everybody's aligned and agreed on what needs to be done so that the engine keeps moving, right, if you will, moving forward. And actually, during our conversation, you mentioned that you recently transitioned to a different role and that you are now actually leading and managing people. How is that transition? How did that come about? Was that something you were always looking for? Tell us more.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm still in it. I'm still going through the transition. It's been about going on a year now, but in general, I had interest in taking on more of a people manager role for the last few years. It's something that I had talked about with my manager at my previous company, and something that came to mind when I decided to join Smith and Nephew as well. Just because, given kind of the state of where the systems engineering group was and the opportunity, I thought there could be an opportunity there longer term. So it was something that I had interest in. In terms of how the specific opportunity came up, it was a little bit of a surprise. So my manager at the time, he had an opportunity come up for him in a different location in the organization. So he was moving to a different role in the company. And the hiring manager who was trying to replace him basically approached me and asked if I would be interested in managing the group. At the time, I was about 8 months pregnant, so the timing was not ideal. But that's kind of how these things go. So I had to think it through, right? Because there was other things going on in my personal life, but it was a career aspiration that I had. And I found over the last few years, as I had been thinking and interested about making this transition, the opportunity has to be there. It's hard, especially when you're trying to break into kind of a people management role for the first time, to time it perfectly. You've got to kind of find the opportunity has to arise, and you have to be willing to jump on it when it comes. So for me, ultimately thinking through it, even though it was going to be a busy year with a new addition in our family, I also thought that I wouldn't feel great if I came back from my maternity leave and was just doing the same thing that I was doing before and watching someone else kind of grow into this role. So I decided to take the plunge. And I literally signed my offer letter for the new role the day after I had my daughter in the hospital. So it was really down to the wire. And then I went on maternity leave for 3 months. So I was kind of out for a little bit, but came back and then stepped into the role and have been coming up to speed since then. And in some ways, it was nice to have a little bit of a break with the maternity leave to allow, like, I was forced to step away from a lot of the things that I was doing in my day to day anyway. So when I came back, it gave me a little bit of space to really think about, where do I need to be plugged in the new role? Like, where do I need to be reprioritizing my time? which things do I pick back up that I set down when I went on leave, and which things do I let other people continue to tackle. So it was a little bit helpful from that perspective, in that I didn't have like already a job that was
Mhm.
running full speed that I had to figure out how to manage and offload.
Yeah, I guess the time gave you a little bit of distance from your current role to help you think about the new role and how you want to tackle it, right?
Yeah.
So even though the timing wasn't the best, as you said, it must have been really challenging. It, as you said, it worked out, and the opportunity came opportunity comes when it comes, right? And
Mhm.
how has it been? I know you said you feel like you're still in transition, but how has it been
Yeah.
so far?
It's been good. So I've been enjoying it. I remember, like, initially I had some fears, as I imagine many people do when you're stepping into this role. But I remember the first week where I was just setting up meetings with my team, like one-on-ones, to get to know them better, to understand kind of where they were at in their careers and their projects. And I was like, are they even going to talk to me? Like, are they going to have anything to say? And so those initial fears, I feel like I breezed through quickly. I got to know the team. They accepted me kind of in my new role. They've been great. They've been really helpful. And then I think it's a longer journey. My manager now said something to me when I was first coming into the role, kind of his reflection on his own transition, which was, you kind of get in the role and you're like, great, I'm doing it, it's happening, and then things pop up. So, for example, my first employee who quit, right? There's kind of these leadership challenges that come up, and you have to deal with them, and they come up when they come up. And so I'm still working through some of those, but in general, it's been great, and you kind of build those skills and those experiences based on when things come up and how you tackle them, so you kind of better understand what your own response and your own style is as a manager. I think as time goes on.
That's true. What have been the most fun and the most challenging parts of your new role?
Yeah, so definitely in terms of what I've really enjoyed is I've really enjoyed getting to know and work with the team more closely. So it was a team that I was part of, but the way that we're structured, I wasn't working with a lot of them on the day-to-day basis. So it's been really great to really understand their skill sets and their strengths, and work with them more closely. And then I've also really enjoyed kind of the personal development side of it, in terms of the folks on my team understanding how they want to grow, what they want to do with their careers, and trying to figure out how I can help there. And also with the capability development piece. So, I mentioned our systems engineering team was brand new 4 years ago. So we've rolled out some basic, I call it systems engineering 101. We've kind of got embedded now, but there's still a ton of opportunity for where we continue to grow the systems engineering practice. And that's a part of the role that's really exciting to me, because we get to kind of define where we go next, what we do. So that's all been great. And I guess on the fun side, the other thing that I've enjoyed is just getting to see more visibility into the business process. So you kind of get to understand some of the whys behind the decisions that are being made. You get just a little more view into how things operate at the business level. Um, in terms of challenges, there's there's a lot of balls in the air when you're a manager, right? Um, so that's been I'm still trying to figure out exactly what you prioritize, and when and how. For me, like, my guiding principle, and I don't know if I always uphold this on a day to day when things get crazy. But for me, it's always the team should come first. So if anyone on my team needs something, if they have a question on their project, like, I always want to make sure that I'm available and helping them kind of unblock and move things along. But you also have all of project commitments that come up, and a lot of other competing priorities. So it's something that continues to be a challenge. And then I think the other big thing is just figuring out how to make a mindset change on kind of where do I bring value to the business now? It's really easy when you're in a technical leadership role and you have, or at least I found it easier when you're in a technical leadership role and you have like these direct deliverables, right? There's things that you, for the project,
Yeah.
like you're check
Yeah.
marking off your list. And in a people manager role, there's less of those things, right? And it's more about, are the programs healthy? Are they moving as they're supposed to? What are the risks? Um, and so you kind of have to redefine your role a little bit and what value you bring to the company, and reframe a little bit that way in terms of mindset.
Yeah, I can imagine, right? Because I mean, as a tech lead or a project manager, you have tangible deliverables that you deliver, and then when you move into managing people, it's almost like the people are your deliverables, and then how do
Hmm.
you kind of, yeah, understand what you bring to the team in that sense?
Yeah.
Uh, has anything surprised you? Any differences between what you thought the role would be and what the role is?
Yeah, definitely. The one that I always tell people, maybe a little jokingly, is like I feel like I play therapist a lot. Like I didn't realize like how much I would be helping with like interpersonal challenges that people on the team were having, but that's part of it, right? And and sometimes you gotta help your team figure out how to work with somebody who's challenging or to help them see a different perspective to get them unstuck from a problem. So that's one that I kind of say jokingly, but um, I think the other piece is what you have the power to influence, right? Like I think when you're at the tech leadership level or individual contributor level, or at any point in in an organization, you can see challenges across the company. You can have ideas on how you want to make them better. And then when you get in this position, you're like, all right, now I'm going to do it. Like, and there's definitely more opportunity, I think, in some of these roles to help drive change. But there's still constraints, right? So I think helping to figure out like what is the organization really focused on, how does the piece that I'm driving fit in, and how can I get traction on those things, and realizing that maybe some of the things, at least for me from like a systems engineering perspective, where I'm like, this is really good systems engineering, we should be doing, interface management, or we should be doing model based systems engineering, and then seeing trying to understand if there's an appetite for that in the business and what business problem it solves, is something that has been kind of a mindset shift, and something that you've got to really make sure that where you're focused is driving the business forward and aligned with their priorities as well.
Yeah, it almost sounds like it's systems engineering people instead of systems engineering requirements or products, right?
Yeah.
It is the skill sets sound, I'm hoping, or it sounds like the skill sets are very transferable. So I know
Hmm.
we mentioned frameworks. SDM loves frameworks. We learn a lot of tools. Have you found that they are transferable between managing projects and technical requirements and complex systems to managing people?
Yeah, totally. I think about this as a lot because often in the SDM curriculum, I feel like you'll hear people all the time say that a system could be anything, and there would even be examples in the curriculum about organizational systems or other things like that. So, yeah, the tools are definitely applicable. One specific example I could give you is there's a tool that we learned called the design structure matrix, which kind of looks at different parts of a system and how they interact. And I actually did one the other day for the organization. We were trying to reorganize the way that a team was going to run on this really complex program. So there was a bunch of different kind of sub programs, and we were, lining up program leads to that. Um, and there was a proposal for how we were going to structure that team that didn't quite make sense to me. And I was like, I got to understand why it doesn't make sense. So I took a design structure matrix and I threw all the bits in, and I understood, kind of it helped me pull out like, what's not quite right here, and
The
reorganize
modules,
those
yeah.
teams so that they would be, you know, aligned to, what made sense for the project.
Yeah, more cohesive and
Hmm.
yeah, group the interactions together and
Yeah,
then spread.
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, that's amazing. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Um, how has it been applying systems thinking to organizations? Do you find, I mean, it's a little bit more abstract than,
Hmm.
putting it into on using it on technical systems, but has it helped?
Yeah, definitely. I think so systems thinking, I think just the idea of being able to hold big pictures in your mind, understanding where there are interactions, it is helpful because, like you were saying, organizations are complex systems of people versus kind of complex products that we work on. So I think that skill set and that mindset that SDM kind of instills in its grads is helpful for any of these types of roles where you're looking at complex organizational dynamics as well. And the other piece too, just in the, I was mentioning we kind of have, or as part of my role, capability development is something kind of
Mm,
under the um, realm of what I'm doing, and so the training, all of the network, like I still talk to some folks from SDM. We've had one of the SDM professors actually come out and guest lecture at Smith and Nephew and help us with some when we were first setting up. And so all of that is so applicable to what I'm doing on a day-to-day in terms of trying to instill best practice with systems engineering in the organization. So it's all been very relevant, I'll say, in my recent role.
That's awesome. And it's amazing how you don't realize the network you're building till you realize the value of the network you're building when you need it, if you will, right? It's like, hey,
Yeah.
I think I know a person who can help us with it, kind of thing.
Yeah. And
And
I feel like I'm sure it's like this at a lot of programs, but at MIT, they always said that like if you reach out to somebody at MIT about what they're interested in or their research, like that person's always going to respond and they're always going
yeah,
to help.
exactly.
And I've found that to be very true, even after leaving the program and being a few years out at this point.
That's awesome. Yeah, it is definitely great to have the networks to lean on, whether it's your school network or the MEM network, if you will, or SDM, like the community of students and
Hmm.
alumni, if you will. I was very interested in our conversation that we had earlier about some of the advice that you had or the structure you had to help you succeed in your transition and the new role.
Hmm.
I would you like to share that with our
Yeah.
attendees?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that my company does to try to help set new managers up for success. So there is formal leadership training for new managers. So I think that's a great thing to make sure, and it also gives some consistency. I think as new managers are coming up to speed on, um, kind of expectations and just basic tools to use as a people leader. And mentoring was also something that's been really important. And when I took the role on the interview team that interviewed me, that was one thing that they specifically wanted to make sure that I had mentor resources available. So they set me up with someone kind of right away. And then I've also kind of found you kind of find your own mentors and network as well. So I would say from that angle, mentorship has probably been the most impactful thing as I'm kind of going through this transition. And it's been helpful to have folks to talk to at different levels of management and at different kind of phases of their career. So I have one colleague who I talked to who's she made a similar transition to me maybe about a year prior. So kind of having some of those folks that are more your peers or kind of going through it at the same time is really helpful because they've got a little bit of foresight, but you can also just kind of talk through what are the challenges, what's working for them, what are they trying, and then also having folks obviously with more experience is really great to understand kind of their perspective. And for me, I always think about what kind of leader do I want to be and who do I see in the organization that's emulating that, and those are kind of the people that I seek out and will ask advice for if I'm in tricky situations. How would this person handle it, because they might be graceful under pressure or whatever that is. So yeah, I think in general having that network, reaching out when those challenging situations pop up, because like how I was mentioning, they're not all going to pop up in a year and then you're seasoned and you're ready to go. They kind of come as they may. But that's been, I think, the most impactful thing as I've been making the move.
I can imagine, right? It's as you were saying, you were trying to find your own leadership style and what sort of a leader you are and you want to be. It's good when you see examples of who you want to be or who you don't want to be, and then you can learn from them, right? And say, okay,
Yeah.
this is where I fall in this scenario at least, and move. And I feel like it's always going to be a journey. As you said, like there'll be new challenges that pop up, there'll be unusual challenges that pop up. Some that people have handled before, some people have never seen before, and having the resources and the mentors kind of help you navigate all of those situations, if you will. And it is really great to have those resources at Smith and Nephew and to have them set it up for you too. Like,
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope other people that are going through this, their companies are also supportive, but I think there's also a lot you can seek out on your own as well. There's definitely a ton of folks that have gone through this transition at some point in their career, right?
yeah, absolutely. So we have a few questions come in, and the first one was about dealing with cross-functional teams. right? So they're saying, and I think you have two interesting hats to answer this question from. The question says, how have you handled working with cross-functional teams when they each have their own working style? Now there's your hat from leading projects as a systems engineer. How did you handle that? And then your hat as managing people, how do you handle that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's it's a big part of the day-to-day on these types of programs. So I would say as a technical lead, my approach was always I wanted to align the cross-functional team pointed at the problem and not pointed at each other. So what I would say, so everyone, like I said, there's going to be tensions. They're going to bring their own kind of opinions. So I'll name drop another SDM tool, but I used to use a lot of trade studies, um, and those can be simple. They can be simple frameworks that you use, or they can be more complex. But I would always try to have that framework on, okay, like what are the things that are most important? And if it was a big cross-functional decision, I'd have criteria specifically called out as like, these are the customer focused items. You know, marketing is going to weigh in here. These are the program focused items. Cost schedule, PMO is going to weigh in here. Here's our technical risk and our things like that, which is more the R&D team. But having that to kind of, I find, is a helpful tool to help, like when there are tensions, to align the team towards that and say, I hear you. What's important to you? Let's mark it down here. Let's weigh the pros and cons. And at least at Smith and Nephew, I'll say, as we've been trying to roll that out, we've gotten a lot of traction with that with our cross-functional teams, and it's been helpful. And then maybe more from the manager standpoint, when some of those challenges come up now, or when my team brings some of those challenges that they might be having with someone on their team, um, like my general kind of approach, I think, is to always try to understand where where somebody on your team is coming from, right? Like, what's their point of view? What do they care about? To try to frame it that way, because that understanding is often enough to kind of help you have a productive conversation. But a lot of it too is about building strong relationships with your coworkers, inside and outside of your programs, right? So, and a lot of that comes with, I think, time and working together. But that's helpful, right? And if you get in a tricky situation where you're kind of going at it with somebody that you're usually a good teammate on, touch base with them offline, or that kind of thing. If there was a tension filled meeting with a lot of people, and just kind of grab them on the side. So I think in general, building relationships and kind of doing that relationship maintenance on the day to day goes a long way as well.
Yeah, when I was working at Motorola as a systems engineer, my way of working was I would actually hit all of the stakeholders I needed in a meeting before the meeting, just so that I understood their points of views, and ask all the questions I could ask at the time, so that when we got to the meeting and when they expressed their point of view, I knew where they were coming from, but then I also knew everybody else where they were coming from, just to build that consensus. So it's easier to have like one person who understands all the different sides, so you can find like the point that works for everybody, if you will, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's amazing how much more open and forthright people are when you're talking to them one-on-one versus, in a large meeting and you put them on the spot
Yeah.
and say, tell me yes or no, and they're like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
true.
exactly. We have another question coming in, and I'm going to ask this in part, and the other part I'm going to say you should probably reach out to Ashley on LinkedIn directly to get more information, because it's a very personal or individual question, if you will. So the question they have is, what is your suggestion for someone to learn about the product development process in a new industry or sector? Like, what's the best way to go about it for somebody who doesn't have previous work experience in that sector?
So I'd be curious to know the sectors. In general, I find that some of it is kind of transferable. So there's similarities, right, between med device, product development, aerospace, defense, like different things like that. But there's a lot of good resources. So depending on what your company is, and how structured their product development process is, honestly, I learned a lot of this on the job just by kind of going through it, and seeing product development processes at different companies, and understanding what's similar, what's different, what works, what's what needs to get refined. But there's also a lot of general resources. Like if you just want a basic intro, sure, you could find an online course for that. There's a lot of textbooks, like a lot of product development is even taught in engineering school now, at least the basics. So I think there's a lot of avenues to go that way, but I would definitely look within your company as well to see if there's resources that you could, learn specifically kind of your company's approach to the process.
Yeah, and if they're looking to join a new company, I think the best way is to find somebody who works in product development and,
Hmm.
find a way to get an informational session interview, like a 15-20 minute chat with them saying, hey, I'm interested in learning more. How does PDP work in your organization? And especially if you, as you said, Ashley, if you can relate your experience, right?
Hmm.
With product development process in a specific industry to that industry, there's always some
Yeah, I
transferability.
often find like the words are different, but the intent is the same,
Intent
right?
is the same, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. um and then this is a job related question, so I'm going to put it out there, and you can say yay or nay on it. It says, is it essential for anybody who's interested in product or systems engineering role at Smith and Nephew to have prior experience in medical devices or healthcare?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of people ask this, and I hear that too from
Oh, good.
people that I know that have been trying to get into the medical device industry in general, like Smith and Nephew or other places that um, isn't required. Um, I would say it is preferred, but not required. In general, we're a regulated industry, right? Like there's a lot of transferable skills. So if you understand, like for R&D at least, if you understand product development, if you've worked in some type of regulated industry to like understand that there are standards that we need to abide by and we have to answer to the FDA and things like that, I think you can build a strong story of how your skills are transferable. And for some of the folks that I've talked to, like friends or folks from my professional network that have reached out in the past about trying to get into the medical device industry, um, my advice for them and the ones that I've seen who have been successful have been folks that have tried to get some exposure to medical device development, either through if they were at MIT at the time, through MIT, through work or
Internships
startup
or
projects there. Yeah,
startup projects,
exactly.
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because if
yeah,
you know enough to be able, I feel like knowing a little bit so that you can then build that case of like, okay, I haven't done medical device, but I've done
yeah.
these things, and this is how I know I could apply it here. Um, that can be really helpful if you can get even just like a little bit of background.
Yeah, and as you said, right, the terms are different, but if you understand those terms, then you are kind of talking the language that they understand, and then you
Hmm.
can express what your capabilities are, if you will. Um, there's one which says, with systems engineering experience, how confident one can be to handle projects without any technical background. Um, so
Hmm.
I'm assuming
Yeah.
the question is, can you be a systems engineer in a domain where you don't have the technical background of
Yeah.
for?
So I would argue that systems engineering is a technical domain. And I hear this a little bit too. So I get it. It's, you're not necessarily doing a schematic or doing a CAD drawing or whatever, but it's an engineering discipline. It's technical. There's things that you get into in terms of data analysis, like how do you write good requirements.
Yeah.
So I would argue it is technical, but I think in general, at least with some of the systems or engineering organizations that I've seen in med device, where they kind of tend to wear that technical lead hat as well. I think having some technical experience as kind of undergrad and then moving into systems engineering, I've seen that career path be really successful for people. And part of that is just because you have experience working as part of the development team before you're trying to take on those roles that are a little bit
Mhm.
more front end, a
Yeah.
little bit more kind of overarching. Um, but I
Yeah.
think you can do that with a variety of different kind of backgrounds and experiences.
Yeah, and I think you need a little bit of technical background to be able to understand what are the right questions to ask,
Yeah.
right? And so you can maybe transfer the systems engineering portion between one industry to the other, but you still need a little bit of the technical background of the industry you are transitioning into,
Hmm.
right, to be a very successful systems engineer. And that's not to say you can't pick it up on the job. Like if you're upfront about it and you tell your hiring manager that this is what it is, and they give you X months to kind of ramp up, that's
Yeah.
great. But to be successful, you're right. I feel like you need a little bit of technical background just to be credible,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's fair.
yeah, yeah. All right. Those were the questions. Oh, no, never mind. We have more. Have you seen any transition? So we talked about, doing a bit of product development and then moving to systems engineering. Have you seen the reverse transition happen? Like people who are doing systems engineering, then they want to go into product development or product management?
Product management, absolutely. And I feel like there's a little bit of overlap there. And one thing too, I guess I'll say for systems engineering is I think exactly what that role is and how it's defined is slightly different in different industries. And in med device, it's variable. So like there's some industries like defense and aerospace where it's pretty well defined, like what systems engineers do. In med device, it's newer to med device. It means a little something different at different companies. Um, but yeah, I think there's definitely overlap with product management in terms of that understanding stakeholder needs, understanding customer needs, like being the voice of what the product needs to be. And I've definitely seen people kind of make that transition. There's a lot of folks from the SDM program too that kind of come and then want to pursue product management afterwards. And to me, systems engineering is so overlapped with product development that I think that's a natural kind of back and forth. So at least in med device, I've seen that kind of in one of the early companies I worked at the time, their systems engineering group, they were really just doing like they were owning the systems engineering deliverables. So there'd be people that were like requirement specialists or risk management specialists. And a lot of those people then transitioned into like broader reaching product development roles. So I think it kind of depends on, what the role is at the company and what your interests are. But I think there's a lot of overlap and a lot of relevant skill sets you learn as a systems engineer that are applicable elsewhere.
That's true. So I think that those were the questions I got. We have a few more minutes. I was going to ask you. So how was it when your first employee quit? How did you handle that?
Oh, well, I freaked out a little bit. It was someone that I enjoyed working with a lot too. So I had a moment of panic. I think I actually sent my boss a message online that said SOS, do you have 5 minutes to talk? So I freaked out a little bit. But overall it was okay. It was like an experience you have to go through. It was pretty soon after I took my role. So it was a little bit of a shock, but we worked through it. It gave me an opportunity to then go through the hiring process because we were backfilling the role. So it kind of allowed me to work through that, understand how that works at the company. And now I've done that. And when it, if it happens again, I hopefully I don't think I'll send an SOS. I won't send a panic message to anyone. But yeah, definitely one of those things like that are the harder parts of being a manager, right?
Yeah.
So the less fun part.
Yeah, I can imagine. And especially coming it so soon after you start the new role.
Yeah.
Right. So that must have been a shock. I can totally imagine. Um, we talked a little bit about mentorship and how it has helped you, grow into your role and understand the ins and outs of things and have somebody to kind of lean on to get advice and so on and so forth. Has it been mainly within Smith and Nephew, or have you also reached, like, you also have mentor outside of it? And if so, can you share any resources that people can lean on for when they are trying to
Yeah,
transition into people management?
that's a great question. So, a lot of them have been internal. I find like some internal mentorship is helpful because those people kind of understand how your organization works and, the challenges and constraints. But there are external folks that I reach out to as well. For me, I find a lot of my network is folks that I've worked with or met in the past. So I have an old manager from a previous job that I still talk with, or a few folks that from that way that I, kind of talk with. But there are, at least in Boston, and I'm sure, nationwide, there are resources that set up kind of more formal mentoring groups as well. So I actually participated in, it was like I'm gonna blank on the specific name, but AWIS, it's Association of Women in Science and Engineering. And they did like a mentoring group program where they would pair you with a group of people looking for mentorship and mentors based on kind of your interests. And I actually found those external programs to be really helpful, and I found them to be very thoughtful about how they were pairing mentors and mentees. So I think that's a great resource as well. just to, and I really liked the group mentoring element of that, because I find it really helpful as well to be with other people that are looking for advice at similar points in their career. Like those
Yeah.
conversations to me sometimes are more valuable than talking to somebody that has, 25 years of experience and is like, this is what you should do in this scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think some of the SWE chapters also have started mentoring groups, and you can find that way. MIT has a good mentor network as well if you
Hmm.
want to join in. I'm sure there are others. But the reason I ask is it's been hard to find associations where it is women leaders in science who are now doing people management, not just technical leadership, because there are groups that are like SWE is, right? We talk about
Hmm.
women engineers, they're all tech. But I was wondering about resources for people who are technical, who are now leading technology organizations, and how do you find mentorship in that? So AVC you
Yeah.
said is a, yeah, cool.
Yeah, it was one, and it was some of what you're mentioning kind of with SWE as well, but there are people at different points in their career. Um, but yeah, I'm sure there are others out there.
Yeah. I think those were more or less the questions we had for the fireside chat. If you have questions for Ashley, now is the time to ask. Um, if not, Ashley, any advice for people trying to get into systems engineering or get into sports medicine? Oh, somebody said I have one more, so I'll wait while they type it out. But um, what do you think are the skill sets required for anybody interested in medical devices, sports medicine, or um, systems engineering kind of roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think we hit on some of it, but a lot of for systems engineering and what I do, it's kind of like that big picture thinking, um, being customer focused, stakeholder focused, kind of understanding what those folks, what everyone that's going to use your product and work on your product needs, and being able to break down complex problems into manageable pieces. And like if I had to explain what my team does on a day-to-day basis, like that's ultimately what we're doing. We're taking really complex problems and we're trying to help figure out how to let the team address them in a straightforward and systematic way.
That makes sense. I am still waiting for that question to come through. So we shall um, give them a couple of more seconds of typing time, if you will. And then we talked about your transition from leading projects to leading people, right? And you said you were like, okay, I have a lot of things going on in my life, and do I want to take this on or not? What was the thing that finally tipped the scales in the favor of just doing it?
I think for me, it was just thinking about the alternative on how I would feel if I passed on the opportunity ultimately. And maybe a little of being naive to like what it was to have a kid at the time, to be honest. I didn't know yet. I didn't know what we had
Yeah,
coming in store for that.
yeah,
But
yeah,
honestly, it's been great. And I often find in general, right, like there's chapters of life, there's phases, and
yeah.
often if there's a transition at work, or at least in my past, like if there's a going through a transition at work, there's some transition in my personal life that's happening at the same time. And so you kind of just roll with it and figure out
Yeah.
kind of the new normal.
Yeah, I'm learning that if you wait for the perfect time, there's never going to be a perfect time. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
if you wait, I keep telling myself I'll wait for things to settle down. And then I realize 5 years later that that is settled down, like normal state, right? So
Yeah.
you just have to learn to roll with it. Um, all right. I if you so if there are any questions, Ashley, can the attendees reach out to you on LinkedIn if they
Yeah,
have any more questions
absolutely.
about Smith and Nephew or systems engineering or whatever be the case?
Yeah, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn if you have questions or want to connect.
Awesome. So I will share Ashley's LinkedIn profile, or you should already have the link to it. If not, I will share it along with the recording in case you need to go back and look at some of Ashley's insights and advice. So stay tuned. I want to say thank you so much, Ashley, for your time. I know it's a Friday afternoon. It's almost the end of the work week. So I appreciate you taking the time. It was a great conversation. I and everyone attending, I'm sure, appreciates the advice and insights you have, and we are grateful to be learning from your experience. So transitioning from consulting to systems engineering to now managing systems engineering, it sounds like a great career path.
Great. Thanks for too. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Have a great weekend, everybody.